Okay, the 9th World Islamic Economic Forum takes place in London in October. It'll be the first time this forum has been held outside the Muslim world. Ahead of this event, a Malaysian contingent, including the country's Prime Minister, are in the UK capital to promote the $1.6 trillion global Islamic finance industry. Tun Musa Hitam is the chairman of the World Islamic Economic Forum and a former Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia. Welcome. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you very much.
So my question really is this. We've been talking about Islamic finance for a very long time, it seems to me. 1.6 trillion on the face of it sounds like a lot, but when you put it in the context of the ambition that was expressed almost 20 years ago for this sector, it hasn't grown as quickly as one might have expected. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I beg to disagree with you in terms of the speed and the size of it that has grown within this period that we've just mentioned. We claim, at least in Malaysia, that we were literally the pioneers of Islamic finance. I had personally something to do with it because I was in government at that time. And we never expected it to reach even half this level. That's point number one. You talk about the figures. We never expected to reach half in this sense, but I contend that Islamic finance has spread like wildfire, if I may put it that way. And that wildfire had become more serious within the last 10 years or so, because I suspect it was the failure, if you may, like of the normal standard financing system that the world had established for ever so long. That's point number one. But point number two is that the amazing thing is that while we first set up, it was thought to be specifically for the Muslim world and to serve the Muslim world's economy. But then again, now, if I may say, London is beginning to be a more and more important center of Islamic finance. The Chinese want to have a center of Islamic finance and they want to have Islamic banking. You have in New York, in Hong Kong, even the Russians, if I may, without any suggestion of something derogatory, even the Israelis want to have Islamic bank or Islamic finance.
But the progress of legislation to support sukuk activities has been very slow. It's sort of ground forward in non-Islamic countries.
All right.
And it's all, I mean, maybe some of this is down to the global financial crisis and that the attention to this form of money raising has moved on.
All right.
But it does seem to me, wouldn't you agree, that we're not seeing the progress that we thought we would see 10 years ago
I'll tell you why.
In non-Islamic countries?
I'll tell you why. The basic tenet, the basic thing about Islamic finance is what we call Sharia compliant. You must be compliant to the Islamic Sharia rules and laws related to it. This idea of Islamic finance deals with the modern world. I'm not saying that Islam is an outdated world, but for it to be dealing with it, the requirement of interpretation. That's the most important thing about it, interpretation of it. Every other day, there is an issue. Yes or no, is it halal, or is it in accordance with Islamic teaching or not? So every other day, at any one time, there's always some groups that are working on it. And we've come a long way from just aping the Western system of Western system of finance banking and trying to get as close to it as possible, and in the process you learn. And I'm happy to say that on principle, actually, we have succeeded in adapting ourselves, and I suspect, actually, I claim that even the Western system is beginning to adapt to us. So it's work in progress.
The gap is closing a little bit, and I think international investors have been very...
Let me just say, it's work in progress. I just want to assure you that we are very aware of it, and the corrective process is going on and is getting there.
Let's speak a little bit more about that, because some of the principles are Islamic financial institutions do not pay interest. They require transactions to be backed by real assets. So in some ways it's less risky, more prudent would be the outset comment. But if you look at what's happening in Malaysia, credit has started to soar there. So I wonder whether this is the banking industry that we have internationally and worldwide. The same problems exist. If a bank can't get a profit in one direction, it chases it in another. And in this particular case, case because it can't make a profit through traditional means, it is going through credit. It's trying to push out more credit into the Malaysian economy than would normally be the case.
Well, let me first of all apologize and say that I'm not a micro-managing the whole thing. We're talking about concept. The thing about the practices and the problems that each country faces is reflective of the whole problem of it. And the interesting thing about it is that in the process, I think we have to leave it to the customers to examine and look at each and every case. When they need money, where do they go to? The whole world has a choice, going for Islamic finance or Islamic banking or the normal ones. And it seems to me within a short time, people have been talking about Islamic finance banking. As to the rights or wrong, profitability or otherwise, putting aside the interest aspect of it, for example, it's up to the business people. And more often than not, as far as I know, they turn to Islamic finance. That's the measurement of the success of otherwise of that.
Bob, come in on this and give us a finance perspective, because it strikes me that people like liquidity.
Correct.
Which is developed bond markets, and they also like things they understand, which is developed bond markets.
Well, you've raised the point I was actually going to touch on, whereby, I think the argument for Islamic finance in retail banking is very strong. And you've seen actually the development of a strong retail Islamic finance sector in countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, and in the GCC. So I think there is no debate about the retail banking. There is, I understand exactly, Sharia-compliant investment in equity markets and private equity markets. And, there are elements of the private equity market which are natural for Islamic finance. The area which you touch on, which I would argue actually has been somewhat disappointing, has been the development and liquidity of the Sukuk bond market. And I actually do think that there is a strong case for organisations such as yourselves to actually encourage more market making, more issuance. Yes, the Sukuk bond market today is an order of magnitude much bigger than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but it is still small. And one thing that worries investors going into the Sukuk bond market is their ability to buy and sell. It's that liquidity issue which I think is a constraint on the market.
Well, all business people and the bankers and all that will have an opportunity in London, because we're going to have very distinguished bankers and authorities on this who are gathering in London. Indeed, my British friends from the very beginning said, what about Islamic finance? I said, yes, and that's where we're going to be. Central Bank Governor in Malaysia is coming. She's quite recognized as an authority on this. And all these will be part of the process, I think. We'll never reach the level of perfection, if I may put it this way. There'll be, as far as I'm concerned, the more you discover the weaknesses, the better it is. So that we can be very realistic and say it's not going to produce the results you think or you thought it was going to be.
Speaking of weakness, you've been fairly scathing in the past about the work ethic over here in Europe and some of the problems across the Eurozone. There's been much done since you last made comments in terms of bringing a banking union, some form of banking resolution to the fore, dealing with the structural issues across the Eurozone. Of course, there's still much to be done, but do you think progress has been made over here?
You're talking about the
banking system here in Europe and also the recovery from the European crisis?
Well, all I can say is that you committed, if I may, you committed the errors in the banking world after we have had so much faith in it, and it seemed to have collapsed. And as a result of that, you have made space for Islamic banking and Islamic finance. But by its appearance itself, it encourages you guys to improve your system. In the end, the ideal would be both sides will meet, because after all, we're talking about ethical financing, we're talking about good governance, we're talking about accountability and transparency, and that's what it's supposed to be. That's what it's all about.
If I could just jump in, if one looks actually just at the UK banking system, obviously, a whole raft of mistakes were made over the last 10 years or so. But two key mistakes were too high a degree of leverage in the banking system and also mis-selling. One of the biggest problems in the UK banking system actually was the mis-selling of payment protection insurance. And I think one thing that's very important for the development of the Islamic market is actually to avoid potentially some of the issues that the UK and Western Europe have.
Precisely. This is what this is all about. I happen to chair an international panel to select the world personality in Islamic finance every 2 years. We call it Royal Award. And second time, third time, the experts, the ones we choose, are the ones who contribute most, not only in terms strictly on Islamic finance, but the overall, the meeting point that is to be expected, that is being worked on by both sides. I don't think your system, if I may again your system, Western system, is to be condemned forever. I think, yeah. Well, I mean, it's all. I don't want to sound like a padre or something, but I say it's greed, and you're forgetting your responsibility. Actually, there's a lot of it.
So let me just ask you to comment on the remedies that are being used here, because I was working in Asia during the financial crisis in Asia, and Asian economies effectively fell like dominoes as there was contagion from the Thai baht crisis, and Malaysia didn't escape those problems, and Mahathir Mohamad at the time was very vocal about who he thought were to blame for that. But ultimately, we did get some liquidity from the Fed, but each of these economies had to work out these issues themselves, and it's legendary, the stories of people that were millionaire property developers that became newspaper vendors the next day. So they took the pain. In Europe and in the US, we've used central banks to try and alleviate the pain, and in fact many would argue we haven't taken the pain at all, and there's too much leverage and debt still in the system. So should we have done what a lot of countries like Malaysia and others did after the financial crisis, taken the pain quickly and moved on, rather than what we seem to be doing at the moment?
If you know the history of Malaysia, this is a light-hearted remark. I had big quarrels with the Prime Minister, and I split with him. So I cannot be here to agree with him too much. But one of the things he did was to go it alone. It has paid off as far as Malaysia is concerned. He keeps on saying, I told you so, I told you so. We also repeat it. Mahathir did it right. And that's point number one. Point number two is that those days, no country could escape whatever other economies in the West especially are suffering from. This is actually what happened. The Thai, it started with Thailand. The connectivity with Europe was so obvious at that time. The whole of Asia was, but times have moved on. Times have moved on. Now the center of gravity actually, as far as the current situation is concerned, has shifted to Asia. So in that sense, there have been attempts, and I think these attempts are ongoing, that we ourselves on our side of the world must have a system of check and balance, and a system of if I may say, how to meet emergency situations in a much quicker way. So if this was to exist in those days, we could have collectively come to consensus, though it's easier said than done.
Yeah, hope you're right.
This is what we did. We did at that time. Again, reality is that each one, in times of crisis, each one of the national entities will look at inward. Go it alone.
Well,
don't we all behave like that way?
We're still waiting. We're still waiting for that single currency block that was much talked about back in the day. But we will wait and watch. Thanks very much for coming in, sir. Good to see you this morning. Tun Musa Hitam, chairman of the World Islamic Economic Forum and the former deputy prime minister of Malaysia.
Let's just recap the latest on Egypt. The country's army has warned there will be more bloodshed if President Morsi refuses to step down.